Harvard University has announced a hiring freeze and is blaming in part the Trump administration. In a letter sent out to the university, the president, Alan Garber, says Harvard is dealing with, quote, significant and substantial financial uncertainties driven by rapidly shifting federal policies. The school says the hiring freeze is temporary and that Harvard is already planning for the next budget year, but it wants to scale back costs because of uncertainty about funding. Last week, the Trump administration revoked $400 million of funding to Columbia University because it believes Columbia didn't do enough to fight anti-Semitism.
Well, Harvard University has gotten a letter from the Trump administration recommending measures to fight anti-Semitism on campus or risk losing billions of dollars in federal funding. The school's student newspaper, the Harvard Crimson, posted the letter in full on its website. In it, the White House's anti-Semitism task force called on Harvard to end diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and implement merit-based admissions and hiring policies. It also calls on the school to fully cooperate with the Department of Homeland Security in order to keep its nearly $9 billion in federal funding. Harvard says it's committed to tackling anti-Semitism on campus.
There was a rally today in Cambridge calling on the leaders of Harvard to push back against the Trump administration. Harvard has been warned that federal funding will be withheld from the school unless it eliminates DEI initiatives and ramps up its effort to battle anti-Semitism. WBZ's Paul Burton says the demonstrators are urging Harvard to not back down.
When our university is under attack, what do?
Braving cold, rainy temperatures, Harvard University students, faculty, along with Cambridge residents and city leaders came together to speak out and to stand up against President Donald Trump and his administration. The Trump administration has been deporting international students from schools across the country, claiming many of the students have been participating in campus protests.
And we are here today because our universities are under attack. It is an attack on Rumeysa Öztürk, a Tufts grad student who, for writing an op-ed defending freedom for Palestinians, was snatched off our streets and sent to a detention center in Louisiana.
Organizers say so far this month, 12 Harvard affiliates, including 7 current students, have had their student visas revoked, sparking this call for action.
Standing here today comes at a great personal risk for all of us.
Leo Gurdon is an international student from Sweden.
We want a university with an endowment of $50 billion and the best law school in the world to offer all of us full legal representation. Because when ICE agents show up at our doors, Harvard should have our backs.
And standing up for our values comes at a cost for our future. But I didn't travel 5,000 miles all the way from Pakistan just to be afraid of walking 5 feet out of my dorm.
Meanwhile, Harvard released a statement saying, "We resolve to take the measures that will move Harvard and its vital mission forward while protecting our community and its academic freedom." Cambridge City Councilor Patty Nolan is a Harvard graduate. She says whatever the university decides will have repercussions for the city.
I'm an alum. There's thousands of alums who have signed petitions saying, Harvard, stand up, follow the rule of law.
Don't give in without a fight.
In Cambridge, I'm Paul Burton, WBZ News.
Funding blocked. Tonight, the federal government follows through on its threat to withhold money from Harvard after the university rejected a list of demands that would impact everything from hiring to viewpoints on campus. Thanks for being with us tonight. I'm Lisa Hughes. Unlike Columbia University, Harvard will not make changes that the Trump administration says combat anti-Semitism. In a bold critique of the government's demands, Harvard's president says, quote, "The university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights." As WBZ's Julie McDonald shows us, the consequences were swift.
Swift consequences with staggering impacts. By defying the administration's demands, Harvard was hit with a funding freeze of $2.2 billion in grants.
The conversation is, what in the world is going on? There is so much uncertainty about, is any federal funding safe?
Monday night at Harvard, students swayed back and forth, simultaneously defending the university's defiance of the Trump administration and also expressing concern over what these massive funding cuts mean for cutting-edge research.
These are people who are the best in the world, and that's why they're here. so that research is sort of in jeopardy.
The freeze comes after Harvard rejected a proposal calling for policy changes, including an immediate end to DEI, an audit of viewpoint diversity, discipline for protest encampments, and reforms to international admissions.
The Trump administration is trying to make an example of the wealthy selective institutions, trying to get them to completely overhaul the way they do everything.
Harvard's president explained the university refuses to negotiate over its independence or its constitutional rights. A statement that, according to President Trump's joint task force, quote, reinforces the troubling entitlement mindset that is endemic in our nation's most prestigious universities. And Harvard said that addressing anti-Semitism remains a priority, strengthening their rules, expanding training, and supporting their Jewish community, but that curtailing research funding would not help with this important work. In Cambridge, I'm Julie McDonald, WBZ News.
Well, President Trump made new threats today to Harvard University after the federal government froze billions of dollars in funding. Harvard rejected a list of demands from the Trump administration over school policies and leadership. WBZ's Louisa Moeller's in Cambridge with a look at how Harvard's decision could reverberate beyond campus.
I think so many of us want to work at a place and be part of a community that stands up for its principles, right?
Harvard political science professor Ryan Eno says there's reason to celebrate, even as the university faces a $2.2 billion federal funding freeze from the Trump administration.
If you don't have that, you don't have anything. And
the White House higher ed battle stems from the pro-Palestinian encampments that grew at Harvard and elsewhere last year. Last week, the Trump administration's anti-Semitism task force asked the university to implement broad reforms like changes to admissions policies, an audit of diversity on campus, and to stop recognizing some student clubs. Harvard's response? A flat no, saying it threatens the university's independence and constitutional rights. Then the government pulled the funds, dealing a blow to Harvard's research budget.
it's not just that things have been stopped cold, which a lot of it has, like one day they're doing research and then the next day they can't. It's also the fact that they can't plan.
Harvard Medical School, for example, said federal funds enabled innovations in cancer immunotherapy, treatments for diabetes and obesity, therapies for autoimmune diseases, and the first gene editing therapy for sickle cell disease and more.
Harvard is trying to, have its cake and eat it too.
But Shabbos Kestenbaum, who got his master's degree from Harvard and campaigned for President Trump, says this sort of penalty on the university is long overdue.
And what the federal government is doing is saying you have a track record of discrimination, you have a track record of violating the civil rights of your own students, and we're not going to fund this.
What would you say to people who are like, well, it's Harvard, they have a $54 billion endowment, they can handle this?
Well, look, there is some truth to that, of course. That's why it's important for Harvard to fight.
And it seems the fight is not over, as President Trump Tuesday wrote on Truth Social that he believes Harvard should lose its tax-exempt status and be taxed as a political entity.
They were sort of digging in for battle, and we all have to be prepared to go through that now.
The government is now reviewing a full $9 billion in federal funding for Harvard. That includes $8.7 billion for future commitments for the university and major hospitals like Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, Mass General, and Boston Children's. In Cambridge, Louisa Moeller, WBZ News.
So before we go into the bombshell news, Jeff, can you describe the state of play already in terms of federal funding for research at Harvard? Because I know obviously there was an effort to freeze some NIH funding, which was blocked. But were any new NIH grants being granted before this all happened?
Yeah, so what I would say is many of the details of what is happening are not well understood or clear even to many of the participants. So, there was an episode going back a couple of months ago when the government announced that it was going to cut what's called indirect cost rates on federal grants, NIH grants, from a previous figure that had been determined for each institution to a much lower figure. And they said they were going to do that like overnight. and it would cause a very large reduction in the inflows of cash into all of the institutions. And then that was blocked by a court action, and it still remains in limbo or not yet implemented. But that was the first thing that happened that related to money coming from the government to Harvard and its affiliated hospitals and many other institutions as well. Then there was the second piece of this was several weeks ago when these several government folks sent a letter to the president of Harvard and the head of the Harvard Corporation saying, hey, you will have to do certain things. They gave a general description of what would need to be done. And if they weren't done, $9 billion roughly of grants and contracts over a 5-year period would not be delivered. Okay? And there was no specification of which grants, but it would probably be nearly all of them coming to the Harvard institutions and the affiliated hospitals. Because if you do the math, that's how you can come up with a number of that size. And the first public response to that from President Garber was a statement saying that Harvard was very committed to fighting anti-Semitism, which was given as the primary reason for these actions by the government. And he said that Harvard was doing many things to respond to these issues, and that he looked forward to working with the government to find a way so that the grant suppression would not have to happen. And that he was criticized by some people for that, praised by others. And then that was kind of in a quiet period until yesterday, when the President Garber, together with well, it was just from President Garber, put out the message to faculty, students, and I don't know how many other groups got the message, in which he linked to a more recent statement from the government that came just the previous Friday. And he said, you got to read this. You know, this is really beyond what is acceptable. And we have decided that we will resist this. He then also put, again, the things that have been done that Harvard has been doing because they are the right thing to do, but ended up saying, but the things that are said to be required now are not acceptable to us. We cannot agree to that, because that would be to essentially take over the university in a manner that is beyond the law, beyond the Constitution, beyond the various statutes that could be employed, and ended up saying, we, of course, want to continue the conversation if you want to talk with us about this. But that's what happened. And then a number of hours after that, the government issued a statement saying, okay, if that's the way you want to be, we're going to immediately, or we will soon, block $2.2 billion of grants. Once again, there was no identification of which grants, how they will be blocked, or anything like that. And that's what everyone is trying to figure out right now.
Can you give us an idea of how much scientific and medical research comes out of Harvard? How significant it is in terms of innovation? How many patients it impacts?
Yeah, well, the Harvard institutions combined probably have about $2 billion a year coming to them from NIH, between the university, schools, and hospitals and institutes. It's in the range of $2 billion a year. That is the major source of funding for the research carried out by thousands of scientists in these institutions. Harvard is, if it's not the top of all institutions nationally and internationally in the productivity of their research program, in the innovation that comes out of it, in the new company startups that are developed, in the new drugs that come out, in the prizes that are awarded for accomplishment. It's either the top one or in an arguable group of the top several. Okay, so if that were all to be withdrawn as funds, it would be an absolute disaster for the research community. Many people are discussing, well, to what extent could various endowments or new gifts substitute for the government support? And the answer is some could be substituted, but a great fraction would not be able to be continued if these were all ended and they stayed suppressed and ended for a substantial period of time. So, there are many parts of the university and the hospitals which are telling their faculty, be prepared for stop work orders, and we will be in close contact with you and with our attorneys and with our leaders to figure out what will happen. But there is not a scientist in our community who is not worried that this will happen, and no one can say what exactly the final details will be, but they will not be good for research and for innovation.
Yeah. Have you heard of specific stop work orders? I saw Stat News is reporting that scientist Sarah Fortune, who's focused her work on tuberculosis, got one.
Yeah, so that's one. She went public with that. There are other people who have not wanted to go public for fear that they would then be either further punished. Dan Baruch from the Beth Israel, who heads the Institute for Virology and Vaccine, he was quoted in one of the newspaper articles saying that he received a note that his very major vaccine development research from NIH might be stopped or was stopped. And then there are others that are now starting to be mentioned. I don't think the big statement of millions and millions and millions of dollars of hundreds of investigators being stopped, that hasn't happened as of the last that I looked at my email and my Twitter feed. But there are probably dozens of grants that have been stopped, but they're not immediately getting publicized.
So obviously this is a lot of pain with no resolution in sight right now. But
Yeah.
you are, you're a longtime advocate of, First Amendment rights and freedom of expression. So do you think that President Garber made the right move?
Oh, I think he made the right move, because anything other than that would have been a capitulation to, demands that would have undermined any sense of independence academically of Harvard University. If you read the set of demands, they included, every 3-month reports on, the nature of appointments and promotions, and how, various governance structures of the university would be made available to various groups of auditors that would have to be chosen and approved by the government. I mean, this is a level of intervention that is not even imaginable in, the United States, in my opinion. It's an authoritarian intervention. And, one can only hope and pray that the legal system will prevent it, or that they will pull back because they recognize that the public opinion is turning against them. But nobody knows.
Last question. I know you laid out the impact on the researchers and the research, but the trickle-down impact on what President Garber called the health and well-being of millions.
Yes, yes.
Do you think lives, I don't want to say, people will die, but the health of people is at risk as a result of this?
Yes, well, the health of people is at risk as a result of this because the major theme behind virtually all of the research that is carried out through NIH funding is to improve health. Some of the studies are done to improve health, over a period of several years. Some are much longer term to find the cause of disease and develop new therapies or to prevent diseases by various interventions. They're virtually all at some time scale addressing health. So unless you believe that it was all for naught, which is nonsense, to prevent that research from taking place would be a threat to health.
Harvard University is getting support from other schools and famous alumni like former President Barack Obama for its stance against the Trump administration. However, this fight may be going exactly the way President Trump wants, and WBZ's political analyst Jon Keller shows us why.
The Harvard motto, Veritas, Latin for truth. And the truth is, the Crimson face an escalating war with the Trump administration. Freezing $2 billion worth of federal grants was just the opening salvo, with the president today posting online, perhaps Harvard should lose its tax-exempt status. It's too much, even for critics of Harvard's handling of anti-Israel sentiment on campus, like former President Larry Summers.
Universities are in need of a great deal of reform, and it's come too slowly. But that's not a reason why the government can entirely suspend the law.
But good luck generating broad public sympathy for Harvard and other elite schools the administration is going after.
About 10 years ago, only 10% had no confidence in higher ed. And now, about a third of people have no confidence in higher education.
A poll last year, co-sponsored by her foundation, found the percent of people with high confidence in higher ed had plunged by 21 points over less than a decade, with almost a third expressing no confidence at all.
I would rather be governed by the first 2,000 people in the Boston telephone directory than by the 2,000 people on the faculty of Harvard University.
That famous line is 60 years old, and the contempt it reflects has spread beyond just political conservatives.
So many Americans see them as out of touch, overpriced, exclusionary, not a place for them. And I think that's why when they get targeted, the general public isn't as concerned.
After all, the core philosophy of the MAGA movement is that elites, like the folks at Harvard, have abused their power and neglected working-class Americans. Harvard and other elite schools have also seen their brands tarnished by campus protest and other hot-button issues. What a perfect way for the White House to change the subject from its economic struggles to a war on a central casting villain. Lisa?
John, thank you.
Well, President Trump says pulling back $2 billion in federal funding from Harvard University may not be enough. He is now suggesting that he could revoke the school's tax-exempt status if the prestigious college doesn't meet his administration's list of demands. Harvard was the first university to openly defy the federal government, and as WBZ's Brandon Truitt shows us, neither side is backing down.
We have learned that research programs have been warned to brace for stop work orders. This is rolling out like a slow drip. The university is learning which programs are impacted in real time.
If that were all to be withdrawn as funds, it would be an absolute disaster for the research community.
Chaos and confusion at America's oldest and wealthiest university. The Trump administration announced a $2.2 billion federal funding freeze set to upend Harvard's world-renowned research programs. The university confirming Dr. Sarah Fortune was one of the first to get a stop work order for her groundbreaking research on tuberculosis.
You can't have a successful research university if it is only allowed to study certain questions that are asked by the government, and if it's only allowed to give certain answers that the president likes or doesn't like because of the politics of the day.
The Trump administration ordered changes at dozens of universities, alleging they allow anti-Semitism or promote DEI programs. On Monday, Harvard's president wrote in a letter, the university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. Within hours, President Trump was freezing funds.
Why are the American taxpayers subsidizing a university that has billions of dollars in the bank already? And we certainly should not be funding a place where such grave anti-Semitism exists.
It is true, Harvard is the wealthiest university in the world with a $53 billion endowment, but it's not a checking account. I crunched the numbers and found it's made up of more than 14,000 individual accounts. A majority have restrictions, and most of what's left gets tied up in operating costs, which topped $6 billion last year. The president of Mass General Brigham candid on the uncertainty surrounding all of this, but says she believes the government's requests of Harvard are not applicable to our separately incorporated and independently operated medical and research hospitals. And Governor Maura Healey says President Trump is rolling out the welcome mat for China to recruit top talent as more programs here are bracing for cuts. In Cambridge, Brandon Truitt, WBZ News.
So tonight, Harvard University now bracing for the impact. Harvard Medical School leadership reportedly gathering together employees and warning them that there would be consequences for the school's fight with the Trump administration. The Harvard Crimson is reporting that the medical school is now planning to cut staff and programs.
Institutions all over the country and universities in particular are watching Harvard's fight and what happens next. Columbia was the first major institution singled out by the Trump administration. On March 7th, about $400 million in its funding was canceled until Columbia agreed to changes.
Cornell University had more than $1 billion frozen over alleged civil rights violations. And Brown University may lose $500 million in federal grants and contracts because of what the government describes as the school's response to anti-Semitism on campus.
WBZ's Tiffany Chan spent today looking at Harvard's finances and why this cut will have such a major impact even at a school with such a huge endowment. Tiffany joins us live with the story now in Cambridge. Tiffany?
Now, these Trump administration cuts have far-reaching impacts here on Harvard's campus. It impacts financial aid programs for students, also research in medicine and science, and also technology. Harvard University losing billions of dollars in federal funding as their conflict with President Trump heats up.
$2 billion is a lot of money for anybody, even for Harvard.
The Trump administration gave Harvard a list of demands.
Hey, Harvard, do what's right. Hey, Harvard, do what's right.
End DEI programs and limit campus protests like this one over the weekend, or risk losing $2.2 billion in federal funding. The university isn't giving in, and it's costing them, despite an enormous endowment fund. One Wellesley College economics professor explains why this is not a viable solution.
We're talking about $2 billion once, plus another $500 million a year, essentially forever. That will
drain through that money pretty quickly.
That will do a very good job of depleting that endowment pretty quickly.
The funding freeze impacting the school's financial aid programs and the research happening here at the Chan School of Public Health.
And so a lot of the funding that has supported us to engage with governments and work with governments in planning their research programs was cut off very abruptly.
Researcher Jeffrey Eaton is focused on finding a cure for HIV/AIDS, a mission halted by Trump administration cuts. People in other countries are really depending on a part of you guys' work to kind of make it all happen.
Yeah, exactly. And a big disruption of those processes, a disruption of trust.
If you're at MGH and something is wrong with you, you are very grateful that Harvard is spending all of that money on research.
That's not all. In this heated political climate, President Trump is also targeting Harvard's tax exemption status, a move that would cost the school millions more.
I think it's really unfortunate to link these things together. I think that it overlooks the massive impact that our work has on society.
Now, that economics professor says one solution for Harvard is looking to big banks and getting a loan to cover some of these costs and paying that down depending on how this political climate shakes out. Live from Cambridge, I'm Tiffany Chan, WBZ News.
Federal funding is Harvard University's largest source of support for cutting-edge medical, scientific, and technological research. It's with that funding that Harvard has made some huge impacts on countless lives. First, when it comes to cancer, Harvard researchers developed a form of cancer immunotherapy called checkpoint blockade. That's currently used for the treatment of at least 12 types of cancer. Hundreds of thousands of patients with cancer benefit from those therapies every year. Now let's talk about your heart and heart disease. Harvard Medical School scientists developed devices that regulate heart rhythm and shock the heart out of lethal arrhythmias to prevent sudden cardiac death. This impacts hundreds of thousands of people every year. Let's talk now, if we can, about obesity and diabetes. They have revolutionized obesity and diabetes treatment. A Harvard Medical School researcher discovered GLP-1. That's a molecule that has become the basis for popular weight loss drugs like Wegovy and Ozempic as well. And Harvard has also worked on transplants, and this is huge, alleviating critical organ shortages all around the world. A team at Massachusetts General Hospital, led by Harvard Medical School physicians and scientists, successfully transplanted a genetically edited pig kidney into a living person. None of this would have been possible without that federal funding.
And we turn to the growing tension between the Trump administration and Harvard. The Department of Homeland Security is now threatening to revoke Harvard's ability to enroll foreign students, in addition to freezing all those funds. WBZ's Anna Myler is live back in studio now with the latest developments, Anna, because it seems to be something new every morning.
It sure does, Paula. The Homeland Security Secretary says they will take away Harvard's ability to enroll international students if the university does not turn over detailed records on international students' quote, illegal and violent activities by the end of this month. The Department of Homeland Security also announcing the cancellation of 2 grants to Harvard totaling $2.7 million. The secretary writing in part, Harvard bending the knee to anti-Semitism driven by its spineless leadership fuels a cesspool of extremist riots and threatens our national security. Now, this follows a $2 billion federal funding freeze because Harvard rejected a list of demands, including the Trump administration's request to end DEI programs and to limit campus protests. A Harvard University spokesperson says they stand by their previous statement that they will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. Harvard has an enormous endowment fund, but a Wellesley College economics professor says it's likely not enough to cushion the blow of these massive cuts.
We're talking about $2 billion once, plus another $500 million a year, essentially forever. That will do a very good job of depleting that endowment pretty quickly. If you're at MGH and something is wrong with you, you are very grateful that Harvard is spending all of that money on research.
President Trump is also targeting Harvard's tax exemption status, a move that would cost the school millions more dollars. Live in the studio, Anna Myler, WBZ News.
Also breaking, Harvard students are protesting after the Trump administration threatened to revoke the school's ability to enroll international students. Our Christina Rex is live in Cambridge, near the spot where those demonstrators plan to gather. Christina?
Good morning, Chris. Well, this protest is focused on international students, as you mentioned. This is part of the standoff that just keeps heating up between Harvard and the Trump administration. The Department of Homeland Security is now threatening to revoke international student visas. So let's take a look at some live Sky Eye video overhead right now. You can see that students here are starting to gather on the steps of the Widener Library. The flyer for this protest said, "Stand up for internationals," saying, quote, "We have to fight." The Trump administration has been in a battle with the country's top universities, threatening to revoke funding if the colleges did not comply with a list of demands, including stopping DEI programs and limiting campus protests like this one. Harvard is the first major university to openly defy these demands, and in return, the Trump administration froze $2 billion in federal funding. Now, back out here live, DHS is now threatening to revoke student visas if Harvard doesn't send detailed records on any foreign students' quote, illegal and violent activities to the federal government by the end of this month. So we will keep tabs on this protest, anything going on with it, both on air and online, and bring you all these updates as they come along. For now, live in Cambridge, Christina Rex, WBZ News.
David, Harvard University's lawsuit against the Trump administration will be heard this summer. The school sued the White House after the Trump administration froze more than $2 billion in federal funds. During a hearing in federal court this morning, the judge set July 21st as the date for oral arguments. The Trump administration pulled back money that had already been promised to the school, citing Harvard's diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, as well as campus protest rules. The university argues the federal grants are critical for ongoing research. Disappointing and painful. That's how Harvard's president sums up a school year embroiled in turmoil after the terrorist attack in Israel and the start of the war in Gaza. As Brandon Truitt shows us, the university just released reports detailing anti-Semitism and Islamophobia on campus.
The federal government wanted these reports by Friday, and it all comes as this university is in the thick of it with the current administration. It is a brutally honest look in the mirror for one of the most elite universities in the world. Harvard publishing a set of reports topping 500 pages, admitting they dropped the ball in handling anti-Semitism and Islamophobia on campus, from the start of the Israel-Hamas war to the encampments on Harvard Yard last year.
I did hear stories from friends who are close to me about anti-Semitic incidents that they experienced.
Muslim students were doxxed, their personal information published to embarrass or expose. Students reported issues with one-sided curriculum, speakers, and panels, feeling unsafe or bullied, with their concerns falling on deaf ears. In the report, one student said, despite reaching out to every office, everyone says it's not their problem. Right now, people feel like nobody cares, says another. We all understand it's open season.
I don't think that polarization on this campus is going to be solved by, another task force, another report. It is going to have to come from all of us.
President Donald Trump listed anti-Semitism at Harvard as one of his reasons for freezing more than $2 billion in federal funding. But Jewish students I spoke with here aren't buying it.
Not only is it not helping Jewish students, this assault on universities, but we don't even fully believe it is about us. We think it's a cover to attack the independence of universities, put international students on threat.
In a letter Tuesday, Harvard's president wrote, "I am sorry for the moments when we failed to meet the high expectations we rightfully set for our community." Harvard says they are making changes. Doxing is now officially against their code of conduct, and they're going to start requiring anti-Semitism training for faculty and students. In Cambridge, Brandon Truitt, WBZ News.
All right, Brandon, thanks.
Dozens of professors at Harvard University are pledging to donate some of their salaries to the school to help make up for the Trump administration's funding freeze. They're promising 10% of their pay to help offset the loss of more than $2 billion in funding. The Trump administration cut the funding because Harvard refused to comply with demands from a White House task force on anti-Semitism, saying it would not give up its independence. Harvard's making some changes that line up with what the White House wanted. It's renaming its DEI office, but insists that doesn't mean it's eliminating diversity, equity, or inclusion. And it's going to require new training for students and faculty after a campus task force found widespread complaints of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia.
President Trump took to his social media platform today, sharing plans to take away Harvard's tax-exempt status, adding, quote, "It's what they deserve." This comes after the Trump administration also froze billions of dollars of Harvard's federal funding.
And that affects everything from research to financial aid. WBZ's Beth Germano explains how losing its tax-exempt status would reshape the university.
I work on tuberculosis, I work on hepatitis.
And those are just some of the research areas doctoral student Benjamin Daniels is tackling in global health at Harvard University. And cuts have already been felt in a growing battle between President Trump and Harvard over its academic decisions.
We've had programs cut from, like I said, from tuberculosis vaccination, which was about to open a new trial, which affects almost 1/4 of the global population.
Now the president is once again threatening to eliminate the university's tax-exempt status, which could cost hundreds of millions more annually with a trickle-down impact. Harvard would have to pay federal income taxes on its revenue. Donations could be lost if donors can't claim tax deductions on their gifts. It could force reductions in financial aid and cuts to research initiatives. Wellesley College economist Philip Levine says Harvard loses excellence and access.
Harvard stands to lose the ability to enroll the very brightest lower and middle income students who can now afford to be able to enroll because of the use of the endowment to provide tremendous financial aid for those students.
It's a consideration for the Florian family from Texas, making a campus visit and looking to the future.
Anything that's going to affect cost is going to be something to consider, and whether that's financial aid, loans.
I wouldn't be able to go here if it wasn't for my financial aid.
These two freshmen, who prefer to remain anonymous, say their Harvard education is fully paid for due to their family's income level and don't want their future jeopardized.
It means a lot to me. I didn't think I would have this opportunity, so it does worry me.
In a statement, Harvard says there is no legal basis to revoke its tax-exempt status. It's not yet clear if and when the president would go through with this threat. In Cambridge, I'm Beth Germano, WBZ News.